Peter is truly a genius. I have a tremendous admiration for what he's doing for the world. If you would ask somebody in 1800, what would be the world like? Any futurist in the 1800s, what will the future be like in 2000? They had no clue. How do you use nanotechnology to preserve the information of your brain? So essentially solve the diseases of the neurological disorders we face today. What's the difference between your brain and other organs? Is that the details in your brain matter to rejuvenate the bodies of the elderly after 50. This is a necessity for our healthcare system. It will save our healthcare system.
Hi everyone, I'm Salim Ismail. Welcome to the Salim Ismail podcast. Today we have an incredible friend and a speaker and a researcher and one of the top thinkers in the world on a bunch of different topics, primarily brain-computing interfaces and nanobots in the brain. When we talk about transformation, how we're going to navigate the future of our brains is obviously one of the biggest topics in the world. I've got a couple of surprise questions I have, but while we're getting ready for that, let me first bring on screen and introduce with great pleasure Nuno Martins. Nuno, welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, Salim.
So we first met in 2009, because you were the part of the inaugural batch of Singularity University students in 2009. Tell me what it was like, what you were doing leading up to that, and what made you apply to Singularity University?
Yeah, well, since I was very young, I was 19, 20, I was looking to the world and I realized there was a lot of problems. We have a lot of problems to solve. I was blessed to be born in a country like Portugal, where we have, very decent quality of life. But many around the world don't have and are not blessed as I was. And they live in poverty. They don't have water, food. The environment in their places is horrible. They don't have a house. They don't have access to energy. When I realized that, humanity is just a big family, right? We got our biological families, but, we're essentially a big family. And so many people did for us in our previous generations and created the world we live in today, right? And we owe them so much. And the question is, what should we do for everybody around the world? And how should we take care of our, humanity globally? How should we take care of our family? So I was motivated to make the world a better place. And when Singularity University came along, I was like, this is perfect. This is really what I want to study, because in conventional school, you don't have those options. And Singularity University gave me that option of looking to the global challenges and find, eventually solutions for those problems, or contribute to create a better world, positively impact 1 billion lives, as Peter liked to put it.
So just for the context for the readers who aren't familiar, in 2008, September 20th, there was a founding conference for Singularity University put together by Peter Diamandis and Ray Kurzweil. They invited 70 thought leaders from Silicon Valley, and I had been the head of innovation at Yahoo, so I got dragged into this. I had somehow never heard of Peter or the X Prize or the Singularity even, or even Ray Kurzweil. I don't know how, but I'd missed a bunch of this stuff. And I showed up at this founding conference and the top of my head lifted off going, holy crap, this is amazing. And 2 weeks later, Peter said, hey, do you want to run it? And there's a famous story about that. We put together this thing, which was basically part think tank, part academics, part incubator. And the basic thesis was, we now have a dozen technologies that are doubling in the same way Moore's law is doubling and can scale to a global level. And can we create a set of leaders around the world that can appreciate this and go out and change the world in meaningful ways? And so we decided to run programs. The primary program we ran initially was a 10-week summer program where we put together the top graduate students from around the world and give them half a summer of briefing on the future of these technologies, and half the summer they would focus on a particular project. The objective of that project is leverage one of these technologies that are scaling and go impact 1 billion people positively within 10 years. That was the rough framing of it. So Nuno is describing that thing. So tell me in that first summer, tell me the couple of high points and couple of low points. What did you love the most? What did you hate the most? And I say that with all, because it was you guys were like the guinea pigs, that first batch, right? There was 70 days in that summer program, and every single day we had no idea what was going to happen next, right? Tomorrow's team project selection day, anything could happen. So it was a pretty big adventure, and it was great working with the class that were incredibly constructive in working with us as faculty to guide that first program to make sure it worked. But tell me what your experience was like, because I'm sure the listeners would love to hear that part.
It was absolutely amazing. honestly. Life-changing event, if you call that an event. The work you did with us wasn't. It's not because we're talking here. It's honest. The work you did with us and the way you introduced us to the topics and you challenged us really was, a mind shift in some of the way we perceive the world. Peter is truly a genius. I have a tremendous admiration for what he's doing for the world. And we're blessed to have some of these brilliant geniuses alive today, really changing the world. Peter is one of them. Peter, as you said, created X Prize, created Singularity University, has like 20 different ventures. Most recently, Fontaine Life, which is solving the problem of longevity, something that I'm personally passionate about and would like to see solved. So Peter is one example of a brilliant person, a genius in my opinion, that is really changing the world. The work you did was remarkable with all of us. All of us. I mean,
So
the way you handled all of the 40 people, 40 students from all over the world, just wanting to know everything, and you were able to to manage everything to get them excited about the future and get them to feel motivated to contribute to create a better world was truly remarkable. Singularity University as a first experience back then was truly amazing. I don't know after that I kept in contact, but back in 2009 it was an absolutely life-changing event.
Um, so you came for 10 weeks, and then after you finished Singularity, what did you do? Which project did you work on, by the way, that was aiming to address a grand challenge?
Yeah, one of the challenges we wanted to address was housing, and I kept with that challenge in mind to solve up to today, and I'm still trying to do something about it actually.
Yeah,
And it's persistence, right? In entrepreneurship is really about, as you say on your book, it's really about identifying a massive transformative purpose in your life. What do you want to see change in the world? What do you want to change, right? And since a young age, when I was 19, I wanted to change everything that's wrong, right? But you can't do everything. So how would you prioritize poverty, lack of water, food, housing, environment, and so forth? And I realized housing was a major issue for developed countries. So our project in 2009 was, how do we solve the housing crisis? How do we give a house to everybody in the world? How do we make sure that everybody has access to a house? Well, there are several strategies. We came up with a solution back then on using 3D printing of housing, which is now catching up. It was a little too early, in my opinion, but
yeah,
it's now catching up. But it shows how visionary, these ideas were back in 2009. That's 14 years ago. That's
yeah.
a lot of time, and it's catching up today. But still, it's not just one solution. Using technology to solve these problems doesn't have a specific solution. We approach this problem with 3D printing of houses. I'm now approaching it in a different perspective, actually. But it's really about, as you say in your book, honestly, I think this is really the driver, as you say, it's MTP. If you find an MTP in your life, if you find your massive transformative purpose, you don't need to have one, but if you have one, at least one, you will not quit until you see that problem solved, either by you or someone else. And I think that's so important and something I, really realized at SU.
The thing we did that we didn't say explicitly was when you get somebody excited about solving a billion person problem, right? You can't go back to solving a stupid small problem. You're kind of stuck thinking at that level from then on. You can't go back to building a better mobile ad network, right? And so that was actually part of the hidden objective, was to see, could we get this group of thinkers out there. Just one last word on Singularity was one of the key objectives was the leaders in the world today are making terrible decisions about the future. Can we train a young cohort? And part of the selection criteria, because we had thousands of applicants from hundreds of countries for 40, then 80 slots, was who do we think is going to be running these countries and running major chunks of the world over the next 10, 20 years? And let's give them this insight. And when they go out into the world, they'll make better decisions than our current crop of leaders. So that was one of the rationale around it. So since you left Singularity, go ahead.
Let's put it this way. What if you and Peter were, president and vice president of the United States? How would this change the world, right? Just think about something like this. You pick up two brilliant people and put them in a power position. How would this change the world, right? And not just two, but what if the whole Congress was, people understanding all of this and the priorities of this? What if the world was being run by people with this kind of vision and this kind of willingness of changing the world and making it a better place? How would this change the world, right?
That was the aim. It turned out to be much harder than because the legacy thinking in many institutions and the way we've been brought up. I've recently come across the work of René Girard, the philosopher, who talks of memicism. Have you come across this fellow?
I haven't.
He's Peter Thiel's favorite philosopher, right? And basically what he says is, look, we're born as empty vessels. Everything we learn is copying our parents, copying society. So if you go to Harvard, you're copying all of the people that before went to Harvard, and you try and become a lawyer, and then you try and make a lot of money, right? Wall Street is training a lot of people to be geared towards making $1 billion and the hell with everything else, right? And so his view is almost everything we do is copying other people or other institutions. And breaking that copying pattern is one of the hardest things in the world to do. And how do you be true to yourself? One of the areas where MTP is useful is that it forces you to step away from the copying pattern and look at the world through your own lens, right? And that becomes super powerful. So after Singularity, tell us what did you do? Because you've published a bunch of papers, and I want to cover a couple of those at least. But tell me, what are the main focus areas you did from, say, 2009 to about 2014?
Yeah, one of the ways I wanted to contribute to create a better world was on solving some of the healthcare problems we're facing today. And one of those major problems is when you get to 50-year-old, you get the diseases of aging, right? And some of those diseases are really, changing who you are. For example, Parkinson's, Alzheimer. So they really change your essence of who you are, the person you are. They change your consciousness. They kill you, killing your brain, which is our most precious organ, right? So I wanted to solve that. I wanted to find a way to solve that problem. And in the meantime, I also realized that the solution for that problem might help us do something extraordinary, which is connecting our brains with computers. And that's something that Ray Kurzweil mentions in his 2005 book, which I read back in 2005, The Singularity is Near.
Yeah.
And when you look into the trends, you realize that humanity is currently facing a major challenge, which is how do we handle AI and computing systems? Well, as they grow exponentially and our brains don't, right? How do we handle that? How do we make that a technology that improves the world and make the world a better place? How do we use it, right? And that's something I wanted to, again, solve. And that was the MTP for that specific project of my PhD and my afterwards my research at UC Berkeley, where I'm currently working at CSTMS, the Center for Science, Technology, Medicine, and Society, where we're trying to look into this problem and somehow help solving it.
Let's talk about what was the topic of your PhD?
Yeah, the topic of the PhD was essentially how do you use nanotechnology to preserve the information of your brain? How can you use nanotechnology to protect the information you have in your brains? Not protect, but in a certain way preserve. So essentially solve the diseases of the neurological disorders we face today. Diseases of aging associated with people
Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, dementia,
Alzheimer, exactly. Even addiction. Like it's really, these problems are really in your brain. How do you solve them?
Yeah.
How do you go, and what's the difference between your brain and other organs? Is that the details in your brain matter.
Yeah.
In your heart, you can have a lot of cells and they just pump blood, right? It doesn't matter if they're turning right or left. They just need to do some specific function. They pump blood, right? That's the output of it. But in your brain, the little details on your cells matter. The neurons, the shapes of the dendrites, the axons, the synapses, these microstructures in your brain matter. That's how neuroscientists believe we store the memories and how we store and encode ourselves and our personalities. So we need a tool that is capable of being, so small, of going in these structures and helping us repair the damage down there and correct the damage that not just aging, but any other disorders can cause on us.
Hence your interest in nanorobots and molecular machines.
Exactly. So when I looked into the nanotechnology available, I realized that nanotechnology was done, right? There's just a bunch of particles that go around, but they have to have some kind of capacity of understanding what they're doing somehow.
Yeah.
Down, right? So you would need it, and then so what was available back then was nanorobotics. Like how can we build these little nanorobots? And sometimes people are scared with nanorobots, but let me tell you, inside your brain, you're essentially made of nanomachinery. And I can show you that if you want. I can share when you want. Just let me know, and I can share a video that illustrates that very well, and can show our audience that indeed our cells are small nanorobots, bio nanorobots moving inside the cell and doing the tasks that need to be done inside the cell. So nanorobots are not something strange for biology. It's
Yeah.
really something that exists, and we're made of them inside our bodies.
You want to play the video and let's see how that works?
Sure, sure, I
Okay.
can show you this. Let
Okay.
me show you this. There it goes. Let me just share screen with you.
Okay.
There we go.
Let's see if the podcast setup I have will capture this or not. If not, we'll play it and embed it separately.
Let's see how it looks.
Yeah. As Brad Templeton famously said, AI is easy, but AV is very hard.
It's not easy. Okay, share screen. Am I allowed? Yes, I am. There it goes. So
Yep, I see it.
perfect. Let me play it. Please let me know if it's full screen. It is.
Yep, it's good.
Beautiful.
It's
So
mostly
just
full screen, but we'll play with it. We'll figure it out.
yeah, what you see here is a vesicle, a
Okay.
synaptic vesicle, and this dyning, this little nanorobot you see here walking, is a nanorobot, a biological nanorobot.
Yeah.
And it's a motor protein, and it's moving this cargo, this vesicle, around the cell, attaching to the microtubule. So this is happening inside many of your cells right now,
Right.
massively. So this illustrates, I believe it's a good illustration. I can send you the video later on.
Yeah.
It's a good illustration that this is not strange for our bodies.
Right. It's
This is
happening
something that
anyway.
it's happening, right?
Yeah.
How can we harness this power?
Just
in
go off
order
the
to
stop.
repair
Go
the
off
organ?
just stop the sharing for a second so we can.
Oh, now that's the problem. I realize that. Sorry for that.
Yeah.
Here it
Okay.
is.
Perfect.
So what we wanted to do is how do we harness the power of these bio-nano machines, and how can we even improve them and use them to cure Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and many other disorders? Because this is the right tool we need.
Okay.
This is the technology we need to be able to repair the brain at the scale that these disorders act. We need to go down to the synapses or the neurons and repair the damage that's there. So we need these kinds of either bio or pure nanotools.
Pause for 1 second. I want to do a small segue for the viewers on nanotech. I'll describe it in the way that I've seen it, and then you correct me. Okay. So Richard Feynman wrote a paper that's now legendary called "There's Plenty of Room at the Bottom," and he made the point that if we can engineer the macro world, we should be able to engineer the subatomic and the atomic level molecular world. This sparked a huge amount of research and R&D into nanotechnology, which is very small, smaller than the human hair, down to a cell level and a molecule level thing. A bunch of research has been done around that. 3D printing is one kind of crude output of that. The more refined level is at the molecular level. Can you assemble 5 molecules together and create a gear or a washer or a little motor or a little robot? And you could create, in theory, you need the instruments small enough, but we're getting there. And can you get to that level and create little molecular machines? And that has given rise to a huge thing. There's something called the Institute for Molecular Manufacturing, led by Bob Freitas and Ralph Merkel. By the way, Nuno, I interviewed Ralph Merkel about a year or two ago, right? And I asked him what he's working on now. And he said, for the viewers, Ralph Merkel is one of the godfathers of nanotechnology. And he said, I'm working on thermodynamically reversible computing, where we use molecular bonds and turn those on or off to do computing, which you can then do without heat. And I said, what would the output be? And he said, the result would be we should be able to get 10 orders of magnitude in computational speeds minimal. So 10 more orders of magnitude of Moore's law was what he saw there, which is just incredible. And you may or may not know this, but in about 2013, we were doing an executive program, and Ralph came and spoke at it. And somebody in the audience goes, "Are you Ralph Merkel from Merkel Hash Trees?"
Yes.
And for those in the Bitcoin world and familiar with crypto, the basic underlying technology for cryptography and what then led to Bitcoin is one-way hashing. And Ralph had created something called the Merkle hash tree and the Merkle hash, which is now used by all cryptographers at the lower level. And he goes, yeah, I was that Ralph. That was, 1980s he wrote that paper. So Ralph has this history of coming up with things that are literally 30, 40 years away and then seeing it happen later on. And the idea of molecular machines is one of those concepts that's been in play for the 80s and 90s, but is now just about tickling at the edges of that. So 2 things from you, Nuno. One, how accurate or incorrect was my description? And B, what is the current state of the art of molecular manufacturing?
That was perfect. The description was great. It's a brilliant way to explain the major idea behind this. And my illustration with the motor protein was just to illustrate to everyone that indeed these molecular machines exist. They're inside our cells.
Right.
This is what nature produced, right?
By the way, one of my favorite ways of dealing with people going, oh my God, robots, whatever, is to say, listen, all we are is biological robots, right? Every emotion in your brain is just a subroutine running in your brain. It just happens to be carbon based as opposed to silicon based. So I totally love that framing and that analogy.
Yeah. Same analogy with a horse. I mean, if you look into locomotion and transportation, in nature, we have the example of a horse, right? And our ancestors would ride a horse to move from point A to point B. We now have cars, right? We engineered a way to do something, which is move ourselves in a better way than nature did. So, nanorobots essentially look into biology and see, should we use something like what biology created, like this motor protein I just showed on the video? Or should we create something even better using the same machinery that these bio-nanomachines are made? So we can do, bio-inspired nanorobots, or we can just build them from scratch from an engineering perspective.
So you have two options when you're thinking about this, right? One is to replicate what the brain is doing and doing it better and more. So if you're cleaning up plaque in the brain, that would be one function potentially, correct? The other is to do things that the brain isn't doing and cleaning up and do more. That gets into a little dangerous area of unintended consequences and what damage might you cause without realizing it, right? Yeah. How do you deal with both the technical issues and then on top of that, the ethical issues?
Yeah, one of the, as I was saying, back in at Berkeley where I'm doing research, it's the Center for Science, Technology, Medicine, and Society, which means that we're really looking into the ELSI, the ethical, legal, and society implications of this technology. And we want to make sure that...
Wait, ethical, legal, and societal?
And societal implications, ELSI.
Okay, ELSI. Okay.
Very well known in the community as ELSI.
Okay.
And ethical, legal, and societal implications are, a fundamental as the filter for what should be done and what should not, or what route we should use and what route we should avoid. In order to make sure, as you said very well, in order to make sure that we're mimicking the processes of the brain, because neuroscience community doesn't understand the brain comprehensively, very far from it. So if we don't, the best way to cure the disorders is really to mimic the processes that the brain already has, which will not have any unintended consequence, as you said.
Right.
So making it biologically inspired is very important.
So I have a funny story about this. In 2010, Loic Lemur, one of the Silicon Valley entrepreneurs from France, used to run this big conference in Europe called Le Web, right? And a few thousand people. It was the predominant conference. And he said, Salim, come along and do a talk. And I said, what should I talk about? And he said, whatever you want. So I looked across the subject of Singularity, and I thought neuroscience was the one that it'll force me to do some research in it. So I went around to all our neuroscience faculty, right? And I said, please define the brain. What the hell is it? And the closest definition that they could all agree on, okay, was, I've got the wording somewhere, but I'm going to do this from memory, was a fractal chaotic system that's processing information that may or may not result in consciousness. And I was like, that's it? That's as close as they could agree on a common definition of the brain. Do you have a definition that you like to work off, and what paradigm do you look at when you think about the brain?
Well, yeah, very good question. Well, when you look at, first question, what makes you what you are? If you lose an arm, you're still you, right?
Yep.
If you lose two arms, you're still you, right? If you lose your legs, even your torso, if there was a way to keep you alive, you would still be you, right? So, for example, if you think about tetraplegics, it's kind of like a little bit of what I'm describing. So, essentially, the scientific community agrees that you are in your brain, right? Your brain encodes who you are. It's not 100% accurate, but in principle, this is where you are, where your conscious being resides, right? Then you have this question when we look into some, disorders of the brain. Some people don't have a cerebellum, part of the brain, but they behave normally. And then some people, and so the question is, what can you remove from your brain? What parts of your brain are really essential? So that's the search for consciousness, for the minimum, connections and which is a connector, the minimum connections of neurons and synapses and cells that makes you who you are. And why is this important? Why do we need to understand this?
Well, I
That's a major
mean,
question.
that's an obvious question.
Yeah.
If you don't understand it, you can't manage it, manipulate it, change it, improve it, right? So
And here's
this
the
is,
challenge.
yeah,
Here's the challenge with understanding consciousness.
we have no
How
idea.
about AI?
So
How about AI?
let's deal with
Yeah.
that rat hole for a second, okay?
Sure.
I'll give you my framing on consciousness, and then you give me yours, right? The challenge that we have, and I think Ray Kurzweil put it best in one of our sessions. He said, "Language is a very thin pipe to discuss concepts as complex as this," right? And I think that everybody's like, "Wow, yeah, he's totally nailed it." We're very limited by how we think about description, just the concept of Eastern presence or awareness, etc. The best description. You've got self-awareness, and then you've got the ability to perceive the world through yourself. Those touch on it. There's like three different layers of consciousness that people think about. How do you define it, and do you agree with those three layers, or do you have a radically different view?
Here's I think the point is nobody knows what consciousness is.
Yeah.
But there are a few things we can use that we know that can help make the world a better place. For example, animals.
Yeah.
Is a dolphin conscious? Is an elephant conscious? Is a chimpanzee conscious? There's actually a very interesting test where you can, most likely guess that they are. It's called a mark test, where you show him a mirror.
Yeah, the mirror test.
The mirror test. And then on the mirror test, you make a white mark on the elephant head, for example.
Okay.
And you realize he looks into the mirror and he tries to remove the mark. So he's aware that on the mirror, that's him.
Yeah.
So he's aware of himself.
Yeah.
Now, whatever conscious level he has, if it is levels or not. But what I mean with this is, although we don't understand consciousness, it doesn't mean that we cannot use what we know to make the world a better place.
Agree.
And those questions come with something more interesting.
But there's some flaws in the mirror test and the mark test, right? Because they found that certain birds pass the mirror test, and even though they've got incredibly small brains, we also now know that octopuses have, or octopi have, incredibly broad brains and maybe verging on consciousness, but they wouldn't pass that test, etc. Did you ever talk to Dan Barry about the frog?
I have not.
So when we were asking him in one of the sessions, where do you think self-awareness emerges, and is it an emergent property? And he said, yeah, I believe it's an emergent property, probably based on complexity of some kind. If a system is complex enough, it might generate self-awareness. And we said, how do you think about that in the biological world? And he goes, frogs. And we go, frogs? He goes, well, I've watched a lot of animals in labs. They were doing free-floating experiments with animals to test when they were all in the space program. He said, about the level of a frog, in his opinion, a frog just about knows, oh, I'm a frog, right? In his opinion, a mosquito does not know it's a mosquito. It's just an automaton working away. A dolphin definitely knows it's a dolphin, right? A dog definitely knows it's a dog. And for him, the boundary condition was about the level of a frog, where in his opinion, a frog kind of went, oh, I'm a frog, I'm a thing, right? We found that totally...
We're trying to prove scientifically where's the borderline and what makes part of that.
Very hard, right? Because there's lots of people that are not that conscious, and there's lots of animals that are very conscious, and how do you gauge it? Again, you come up with a language and definition problem around that. The challenge I have with it is we don't have a definition for it, and we don't have a test, okay? So one of the conversations I had with Dan Barry, which was one of the more memorable ones, was I said to him, is there a system in the world that has the requisite processing inputs and outputs that it might suddenly you might suddenly have self-awareness emerge, right? So he said, let me think about that. And he went off and thought about it and came back 3 days later and says, I've been thinking about it. I think I have an idea. I said, okay. He goes, traffic systems. I'm like, traffic systems? He goes, yeah. Traffic systems, in my opinion, have enough computing power, have inputs and outputs and recursive loops that one day a traffic system might suddenly go, oh, I'm a traffic system, and self-awareness might emerge. And the challenge would be, A, what would it do, number one, and B, how would you know? Because we have no mechanism for testing that, right? And I thought that was one of the more very off the radar, but fascinating insights around that. Tell me how you think about that and what you believe is the boundary condition of, say, self-awareness or consciousness, and how do you define it?
Yeah. Well, definitions are hard. One of the papers is coming out very soon that we're publishing is really on consciousness, focusing on consciousness. And essentially, there's no definition, no precise definition. We don't have one either. That's the truth. But we believe that we can use what we know about our understanding of consciousness to make the world a better place again. And we think this is very important, and more funding should flow towards the search for the neural correlates of consciousness to understand consciousness, because that's the tool we have to understand when AI became conscious. And that's something that may be, very important for humanity. With AI growing exponentially every 3.4 months, AI is doubling in power. With large language models having commercial applications like ChatGPT-4, we should seriously consider that AI can either become a threat or an augmenting technology for humanity. And so the question for humanity is, well, how do we make AI an upgrading technology instead of an existential threat for us?
Hey folks, Salim here. I am so excited about our latest launch, the Exponential Organizations 2.0 book. It's a living book. This baby is a living, breathing, always up-to-date source of knowledge on the latest technologies and techniques for transforming organizations and building 10x growth and impact. How do we build a better future using the latest and greatest 21st century techniques? And the best part, you don't have to do anything. You just sign up for our basic tier, which is only $4 a month, and boom, you have instant access plus an AI chatbot interface into the book. You can cancel anytime, but there's more. We have a community of technologists, entrepreneurs, innovators, disruptors, thought leaders that we can exchange ideas with. You can tap into that ecosystem to build your dream. What is your massive transformative purpose? And the book plus the ecosystem in our community is set up for you to help leverage that and build it. So come along. It's a mind-boggling capability that we've built. Trust me on this and come and see us.
Well, the consciousness may play a role there. And also BCI. That's also one of the reasons why we're doing so much work on BCI. How do you make AI an upgrading technology for humanity?
Yeah.
If you connect our brains with a cloud, then there's no AI in humans. There's humans with AI, right? So AI will be an extension of our brains. And the neural processing happening with AI can be part of us if we're connected directly to the computational systems running, the AI algorithms. And then there's the borderline on consciousness. What if an AI system becomes aware of himself? How do we know? How do you know, right? Is it via behavior? Do we have some kind of metric?
That's right.
How do you do that? So the implications for society, not just that, we can improve society also by understanding if other animals are conscious or not and treating them accordingly. Should we give them human-like rights? Should we stop killing them? Should we stop feeding on them? What kind of behaviors do we have to have understanding that they're conscious?
Yeah.
And how do we prove that? How do we prove that, right? Exactly.
So
how do we do it scientifically? How do you do it scientifically? But I think AI is the most important application for humanity. It really puts,
So let's drill into that a little bit. And I want to talk about the brain from one perspective, and then I want to talk about your research papers. And I'm going to show that and just cover each one so the audience has a sense of what you've been working on. Okay. I think it's clear that we have deep limitations in understanding the brain. Language is a problem, technology is a problem, our sensing capabilities, we may not have the right framing paradigm. All sorts of issues come along that combine to give us a very little understanding of what the brain is. However, as you said, that does not stop us from working with it and interfacing to it, right? Or changing it or adapting it and tweaking it, etc. And I think that's where I found that's where most of your research has gone. Right. So let me show each of the papers that you've written, and why don't you give a minute or two description of what that paper reveals, and then we'll give links to the papers in the talk description, and people can go research those by themselves. Is that a good thing to do? You good with that?
Sure, and they can visit my website. I have everything there.
We'll give the link to your website, which is nunorbmartins.com.
That paper was That paper was published back in 2011,
Okay.
and the question we had is, well, I'll ask yourself. Yeah, the major question we wanted to address was, what's the processing power of a human brain? When you go to a store and you buy a computer, what are the two questions you usually do to the salesperson? Well, what's the storage capability of this computer that I'm going to buy? How many photos can I store? How many files can I store on this computer? And the processing power of the computer. Can I run Windows? Can I run AutoCAD? So those are the two main characteristics of a computational system: storage and processing power.
Yep.
Same question for the brain. Back in 2011, my question was, what's the processing power of the human brain? Nobody had a clue. So if you read the paper, the estimates, we reviewed the literature, scientific literature, and the estimates were from 10 to the 9 up to 10 to the 27. That's 6,
That's a
17,
big.
18,
That's a big. It's a lot of zeros in there.
18 orders of magnitude difference. So
Right.
nobody had a clue, right? So we published the paper, we quantified the processing power of the brain, and not just the brain itself, but the regions and subregions of the brain. This was very important for us to quantify and understand when will computers be more powerful, in terms of processing power and memory storage than human brain, and how can we compare ourselves with computers?
Okay.
Something we couldn't do back in 2011.
Okay. But I have an issue with this. Right.
Sure.
Throughout history, we've used different paradigms to try and understand the brain. It used to be we thought of the brain as a clock in the Middle Ages, right? And a timekeeping system. Then we thought about the brain as a storage device and memory mostly, or maybe that happened first. And then somewhere in the Renaissance and so on, we came around with this idea that the brain was a processing system. And now, because of the computation ability we have, we map computation on the brain, right? But every time people look into it, the brain turns out to be a billion times more complex than just a simple computational environment. So
that's the first question we address on the paper on section 2, which is, what are the processing units of the human brain?
Okay. And the answer?
Neurons and synapses.
Okay. And because neurons and synapses are not just bits that you turn on or off, because each of them hold multiple states, somebody actually described each synapse as a supercomputer.
It is, well, we also quantified, you can read that on the paper later on, but we also quantified the quantity of information being processed on a synapse and on a neuron, considering all the factors that you're mentioning. From a neuroscience perspective, everything that's going on there that could be involved with the processing of the action potentials.
Okay. Now, this paper that you've written back then is one of the most quoted papers in the history of neuroscience, right?
Yeah, that's the third one. That's not
that's the third one. Okay. So for this one, which one? Where did you end up with in terms of the computational ability of the brain? Where did you end up between 10 to the 9th and 10 to the 27th?
10 to the 5.52 plus or less 1.13 times 10 to the 16 bits per second. That's the processing power of the human brain. And we also quantify the processing power of different regions of the human brain. Actually, all the subregions of the human brain.
Okay.
So there's a table there on the paper that shows the processing power of every single one. On my website, you have access to the full paper. I think over there it's not. But on my website, you have access to it. And to the full paper, we made it open and free source. That's something we try every single time.
I think that's awesome.
Yeah, every time we publish on open source journals. We like that.
You remember Sarah Sklarczyk, who's in your class?
I do. She's amazing.
So she and I did a whole piece of work around open science and the open science movement and how important that was. And then now she's become a VC in climate change. So you guys should reconnect. By the way, the other person in your class that I recently connected with was Shai Maknes, who in 2009, when he came to he was the big Israeli guy.
Quantum computing.
Yeah, he was doing quantum computing, and his particular interest was room temperature superconductivity. Right. So when this recent LK99 thing happened, I asked him, Shai, what do you think of this? And he's like, it's probably going to be hard to replicate. It's probably going to turn out to be a diamagnet. But let's hope it turns out to be right. And like a few weeks later, it turns out it's probably a diamagnet. And everybody's like, damn. But he thought, by the way, back in 2009, that it would take about 15 years to get to room temperature superconductivity. And we're at 14 years now. So if his prediction is correct, we're very close. Right? So let's hope. Okay, so now in this paper, you basically have, and we'll find the table and show that up as well in the post production here of the speed of the brain and the different. Was there anything in those results that was really surprising to you?
Well, actually, there's one that was particularly interesting. The cerebellum, one of the parts of the brain that has more neurons, doesn't have such a significant processing power, and it corroborates that. Those numbers corroborate with what we know experimentally. The cerebellum is, most likely not a major key player on the brain, on the higher order functions that we believe are more important, that makes us who we are. that mostly happen on the cortex. But yeah, a little bit. I would say I was a little surprised with that. But yeah, most of it was, well, essentially when we came up with a number and we realized the quantitative power of the brain, it was not, well, it was surprising in a sense that the processing power is pretty high. We got a lot of storage space and a lot of processing power if we had all the brain focus on one thing. And that's also, it justifies autism, for example. When you have autism and you have access to your, you just see something and you have a photographic memory, right? Those people who are capable of using this processing power, this immense processing power we have in our brains towards one specific task. So the next question is, can we make superhumans with this, right? Can we focus this technology to optimize the use of this processing power to some specific task? Right. Super researchers,
right?
Super people with super memory, so forth. Yeah. But I think the best way to create humans and researchers is with AI.
With AI, right? Okay. All right. Let me go to your next paper. Okay.
Sure.
And then you tell me what you describe this one for me. So this one is action potential monitoring using neuro nanorobots.
Exactly. So one of the most important information processing in the brain happens in action potentials. So neurons communicate with small impulses,
okay,
that are called action potentials, and this is the way they communicate one to the other. So this is certainly a big part of the processing power of the brain, goes through these communication channels and these signals. Now that we understood back in 2011 what's the processing power of the human brain, the question is what sensors can we use to extract that data and send it outside to the physicians that are sitting outside. So when you want to diagnose a patient, what's the processing power happening on his brain, you want to see what's going on there that's not right. But in order to understand what's not right, you need to get that data out into a computer to make a proper diagnosis. So we would have to have sensors that would be able to monitor these action potentials comprehensively to all neurons. So we designed the first nanosensor that would be able to do that at that scale. So that was a paper for designing those specific sensors.
Okay.
Which would be essential to be on board of the nanotechnology that would report that data into the physician's supercomputer sitting next to the physician when they're in the future doing a treatment for Parkinson, Alzheimer,
huge,
autism, whatever. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let me go to the next one. Okay.
Third one. That was the most successful. Yeah. That was the third one so in this one, essentially, we looked into the whole system. So if you want to build a nano device, a nano robot, if you want to call it that way, you need to have not just the sensors, but you need to have, the locomotion to get the nano robots into the right positions on the brain. You need to have, the computers on board. Essentially, how do you build the rest of the robot? How do you build the whole robot? And we essentially designed that for being built in the future with AEPM, which is atomically precise manufacturing. The technology you were describing at the beginning. How do we build these things atom by atom?
And what's the current state of the art of this? What level of accomplishment has been achieved after? Because this is a research paper saying we theorize this can be done, right?
Exactly. We looked into exactly it. That's exactly it.
The last thing that I remember was, or in this domain, was that the tools aren't precise enough to manipulate down at that level, but they're growing exponentially. And so is there a point at which you think, and could you make a prediction as to when will we be able to create these types of machines?
Well, I can tell you something that's very interesting, gives you a sense. IBM is currently building small transistors with 2 nanometers width.
Yeah.
That's 12 carbon atoms. So today, commercially available technology, okay, is already working at this scale, of the scale we want, that we need.
Yeah.
We need this kind of precise capacity of manufacture things as precise as this. It's being done commercially today. Some research groups around the world are already assembling very interesting nanostructures from the ground up, atom by atom, right? And then there's 3D printing, as you said, where we can, use the future 3D printing technologies for manufacturing things at almost the scale we're talking about in this paper, which is the nanoscale. Maneuvering things almost, if not atom by atom, almost atom by atom. And yeah, I mean, that's essentially the current state of the art. We're not far.
Amazing. So I'm going to guess from what you're saying, like 3 to 4 years.
Well, yeah. Well, I think
we're like 2-3 doublings away. So it just sounds like
to build a more advanced nanorobots, we designed there a little bit more eventually, but still, it's not 100 years for sure.
Okay. What's
So, yeah, predicting the future is always hard. I don't like to make predictions for this reason. It depends on the money that's going to flow. It
uh,
depends on the number of people dedicating. It depends on the work that AI does. Let me give you an example of why predictions are hard to do in this context.
yeah.
Because, for example, think about the protein folding challenge, right? So scientists around the world were trying to understand how proteins fold, right? How they become, a 3D structure based on the RNA, which was a linear section. And it took one PhD student 5 years to be able to, figure out one of the proteins. We had, millions of proteins. And suddenly AI comes along, and in 6 months, it solves the protein folding comprehensively for all proteins. This would take humans millions, thousands of years,
Yeah.
right? And then AI comes along and speeds up everything and gives this for granted for humans, right? So it's hard to predict the future with things like AI, coming into market. But I can certainly give you an upper limit. It will not take 50 years. It will not take more than that for sure. It will be sooner than 50 years from now. Might happen in 10, might happen in 20, but it will certainly not take more than 30, 40 years. 100% sure about that.
Okay. So I'm going to be Ray Kurzweil here,
Yeah.
who takes the collective body of predictions and then cuts it by half.
Right.
And then that would end up in the 5 to 10 year range, because you never know what breakthroughs are going to happen that quantum leap the whole domain, right? Like the AI with protein folding type thing. I want to just take a step back for a second here and just give the broader context for this type of prediction.
And Salim,
Yeah.
Ray Kurzweil, the law of accelerating returns.
Yeah.
Where he says that Moore's law is great, but Moore's law is wrong. It's not wrong, but it's a good estimate, a good upper limit estimate, but it's being faster.
It's been much faster.
Yeah, much faster.
His point in that was that any domain that gets information enabled and acquires informational flow properties then hops on a doubling pattern that's very steady, and that doubling pattern doesn't stop. So that's a very critical piece of theory that's guiding everybody in the singularity community and in the exponential thinking community, right? And it's really hard.
Yeah, when something's dematerialized, it becomes an information technology.
Yeah.
And then you can maneuver that computationally. Peter calls it dematerialization, and it's the same concept.
And it's important here to think about the trajectory here, right? When we have 8 transistors on a chip doubling to 16, doubling to 32, we can just about get our heads around that. When we're at 1 billion, doubling to 2 billion, doubling to 4 billion every 18 months is way, way, way past that, and we can't process that. We can't cognitively understand that. This, by the way, is what I think is one of the genius elements of Elon Musk, right? Because he looks at a technology that's growing exponentially. Where will that technology be in 10 years on a doubling pattern? And then let's build a company to intercept that curve, right? That's it. You have to have the courage to look out 10 years and go, that technology will be there. It'll be that insane in 10 years, and then intercept that. By the way, so let's move to the third. Just a quick question on this paper, this one paper. Why do you think this has become so referenced? Because this is an unbelievably widely referenced.
Next one.
It's the next one. Okay, let's go to that next one. Okay, so this is the BCI one, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
This paper was published back in 2019. It's called Human Brain Cloud Interface. If you Google that, it will be like the first.
Yeah.
Well, essentially, we in this paper we talk about how we can use technologies like the one we spoke about on connecting the brain with the cloud, connecting human brains with the cloud. Basically, what we showed in the paper, and the scientific community recognized it, that the paper was really good and in timing, and the moment was perfect. The paper is now like 170,000 reads, and it was very well received by the scientific community for a reason. Essentially, other scientists around the world were saying, this is right. The time for working on BCI is now. The technologies are coming, and as you said with Elon Musk, if you plot the trajectory, you see that we should, approach this very seriously, investing heavily on technologies to connect the human brain with the cloud, because it's really happening as we speak. When you plot the growth of different technologies, you realize that it's going to happen in the next 10 to 15 years. As Elon, and that's one of the reasons why probably Elon created Neuralink.
Yeah.
We're looking into this invasively. We're looking into this non-invasively. We believe that it needs to be non-invasive for a massive adoption around the world. And the paper outlines this. So I think that the major success of the paper comes from the fact that scientists realize that, the paper outlines a very well and solid reason why we should work on this, how we can make it available. And if this happens, the implications are enormous. And this can be the technology to safeguard humanity from AI to make AI an upgraded technology for humanity.
Okay, pause for a second. I want to
Sure.
drill into 2 points here, right? There's a big debate in the BCI world of invasive or non-invasive, meaning should you put something inside the head or outside the head, right?
Right.
You're going down the same vector, saying non-invasive, right?
Yeah, well, there's a non-invasive being invasive. Here's the definition. It comes back to this question: what is invasive? Right? You're
Yeah,
saying my line for invasiveness is inside the brain is invasive, outside is non-invasive.
yeah,
Well, but when you look into the technologies and you realize how do you know if a non-invasive technology can indeed read your brain in a way to connect your brain to the cloud?
yeah.
And you do the math and you realize it's very unlikely that it works. So you cannot get the right reading, and that's why Elon Musk went invasively, because
Okay.
the only way he can get the data he needs to connect the brain with the cloud is really to go invasively right now, right? By invasively means you need to open the skull and insert something.
Right.
What we propose is you use something that flows on the blood, and you don't need to make a hole in the skull,
Got it.
because a hole in the skull is probably not the best thing. Right?
Yeah, now you're talking about trepanation, etc. Just
Exactly. And we're proposing, yeah, and our proposal goes for something that's removable.
okay.
So what I think is important here of invasiveness is you want to make sure that you have a technology that will allow you to go back and say, you know what, I don't want this anymore.
Yeah.
Just remove it, right? And remove it quickly. Don't remove it, 1 year from now. Remove it, right away. So having this control is important, and having the user and the person having this control is fundamental for the success of this technology, in my opinion.
Okay.
And that's why, again, it's important that we keep this in mind. If it goes invasive, so invasive is a requirement, is a necessity to have a technology that allows you to connect the brain with the cloud. But being a necessity, you have to make it reversible and controllable by the patient.
And easily manageable. Okay.
Easily manageable.
And the reason I like what you're talking about here is somebody asked Ray Kurzweil, can we not just plant a computer in the brain, et cetera, et cetera? And he said, yeah, you could. The problem then is that you're stuck with the limitations of that system. Whereas if I can interface with the brain and I can upgrade my smartphone every year, then I'm getting much increased capacity. All I have to do is get that information in and out of the brain, which is what you're essentially talking about. Okay, I want to lift up a level just to give people a broader context for this, because this applies for a bunch of different domains here. Okay, when you learn a new language, there's typically three phases to learning that new language. First, you learn how to read, then you do comprehension, then you learn how to write. And that's typically how you learn a language: read, comprehension, and then writing. If you think about what Nuno is talking about, we've gone through a whole phase of reading the brain and trying to understand what's going on in the brain. We're in the middle of kind of comprehension of what's actually is going on in the brain and what are the functions and why. Like, I'm dying to ask you, by the way, where do you think memory sits and where do you think consciousness sits? But we'll get to that in a second. But what Nuno is now talking about is how do you write to the brain, right? We have old models of writing to the brain: marketing, religion, yoga, martial arts, meditation, etc. We've been accelerating those. Now we had psychotherapy, then we have neuro-linguistic programming, now we have psychedelics. So there's lots of exponential ways of interfacing and writing to the brain. Now we're talking about a full AI-based integration with that, and the implications of that are quite utterly profound, right? So over to you. What do you think of that? And do you agree that we're now in the comprehension writing phase, and all of them are happening at the same time, obviously?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, one of the ways that we can, when we don't know something, for example, we don't understand the brain comprehensively, we want to make sure that we're doing something that it's, not outside of the scope of what we understand. So that means, for example, let me give you an example. Why do we need to change the brain? If people, if we don't understand consciousness and self, people may say, you know what, I don't want to have these invasive technologies inside my brain because I don't know if it is changing me, who I am, and so forth. So if we connect the brain with AI and we get the processing power happening outside our brains, we don't need to change our brains in a certain way. So the interface, that's why BCI is so important, because BCI allows us to continue to have AI in external supercomputers, and we have access to the cloud with our brains without changing our substrate, without changing our brains, essentially. We're just connecting our brain to the cloud. We're not changing our brains, right? So we can connect the brains with the cloud, get the information run outside the brain, and then get it back to you. And we do that today. Think about your smartphone. When you want to call me, how do you do it? You don't know my phone number in your memory, right? You don't have it memorized in your internal memory.
No.
What do? What do? You access your phone. What does it mean? It means that you have an external memory. You have an internal memory, which is, you were born with it. You got your memory in your brain, and you didn't change your brain to have my phone number over there. You just outsourced that storage to your cell phone.
Yeah.
So what do we need? What do we have? We have a system that allows us to visually read the memory, the my phone number on your phone. You read it on your phone, and then the information goes through your brain, through your visual cortex, and it's in your brain again. Now you know it. So instead of changing your brain to have this data inside your brain, we connect the brain with a phone, but we didn't connect it directly. We connected via our visual system, right?
Yeah.
We use our visual system to read. We're just changing that a little bit. So the sequence today is this. Here's the sequence, Salim. When you want to call me, your brain says, you know what? I have a desire. I want to call Nuno. Your brain sends a signal through your spinal cord. It goes through your fingers, moves the muscles of your finger, and your finger types on the screen. The screen displays my number. Your eyes read it, and this information flows through your optic nerve, goes through your visual cortex, and then you know it, right? So we're just changing this. There's a lot to do here, right? It takes like a second or two for you to get this. What if this was instantaneous? What if you could just close your eyes and say Nuno's phone number? And instead of sending through this route I described, you would just display in your brain the same way you access your internal memory. The difference between today's phone's memory, that is our external memory, and our internal memory is the time of access. You get access to it faster. But if we have a BCI system, the time will be the same. You don't even know if you're accessing your phone or the cloud or if you're accessing your internal memory. So we're not changing your brain. We're not changing who you are. We're not messing up with neuroscience in your brain because we don't understand that comprehensively. But we're giving you the same memory, the same super memory that you now have, having access to the computers and the cloud itself. So by connecting your brains with the cloud, we're essentially giving humans, super intelligence, super memory, and all of this massive knowledge that humanity gathered on the internet without the necessity of changing who you are or having the risk of doing things we don't want that we don't understand in neuroscience.
So to summarize, the interface pathway is a very safe one because all we're doing is taking existing systems and interfacing it differently with them.
Exactly.
By the way, you remember we used to do these late night, we did it in GSP9, a late night session on metaphysics and philosophy and meaning of life, right? It was like a French salon workshop, alcohol mandatory type of thing. So I ended up doing that for every single one of the GSP classes for 10 years. Okay. So I got over time now. I've done like 40 of them in different things. EPs wanted it, etc. One of the conversations that we always end up having is this one around consciousness. Where does it sit, etc. And I make the point in those sessions that for a long time, when it's too hard for us to intellectually hold something, we outsource it to a different function. So, for example, in our early development of civilization, we outsourced morality into religion. And we'd rely on the priests to handle morality and ethics and rules for how we operate because we couldn't hold all of that in the brain, right? Then we moved from religion to outsourcing it to legal structures. And now we use the law to hold that container for that. And so we're now moving to outsourcing different parts of the brain that are too complex. So one of the things that I get excited about AI is all of the processing of information, because there's so much information out there in the world, can now be handled by this external entity. So I'm one of the people that I'm not worried about AI at all, right? I look at, say, PageRank, which is crawling the world's web pages for Google. It's evolving its own intelligence that's orthogonal and complementary to human intelligence and not replicative, right? So I want your opinion about something. I maintain that one of the reasons I'm not worried about AI is that we are biologically geared over 4 billion years to do two things, to survive and procreate. And AI doesn't suffer from these limitations and therefore can evolve in a completely different way. What do you think is the future of this? And do you agree with how I'm framing it or not? And how do you frame it?
No, I think AI is a very powerful technology, and it's very important that humanity uses it to make the world a better place. We can use it making the world a better place by using it to, drive our cars, drive our airplanes, being a personal assistant, taking care of kids. There's a lot of applications for AI, but I do believe it's important that we find a way to make AI an upgrading technology. Well, think about this. What if everybody in the world was an Einstein? What if everybody was super intelligence and had a super memory? how could we make the world a better place with 9 billion people in the world, with 8 billion people in the world, being pure genius, right?
Yeah.
What would the world be? What would the world be with 8 billion Salims and or 8 billion Peter Diamandis, right? How
Purely
would the
frightening
world
thought.
change, right?
Yeah.
This is the singularity, right? The more we have, so the human race educated people in order to say, you know what, you're getting educated, you're one of the persons that has the potential to make the world a better place. So education essentially was our way to get some of us to make the world a better place for everybody, right? What if we could have everybody, well, super knowledgeable, super smart, and that's the connection with AI. That's what AI can bring. It's a powerful technology to make the world a better place by empowering humans to be smarter, more effective, and more capable of creating.
And what do you think of the concerns that the extreme of it is Hollywood movies where AIs get their own capabilities and take over the world, and if we're lucky we're pets, and if we're unlucky we're food, and now you're in a Terminator, Matrix, Skynet scenario. What's your view of that? Do you think it's hogwash, or do you think it's real and we need to protect against that?
Well, I think the borderline goes for consciousness again. That's one of the reasons why we're working on consciousness. Once an automated system becomes conscious, it becomes aware of himself. It becomes capable of, making his own decisions,
Empathy.
planning his own strategies, and so forth. So, do we know if AI is going to become conscious in the next couple of years? Will it? Will we be aware of it if it becomes? And if we connect with AI, that's a problem that I believe disappears, because there will be no AI in humans. There will be AI with direct access to, there will be humans with direct access to AI. So AI will be a part of us, right?
Yeah.
So if AI upgrades and you're connected to AI, it becomes bigger, but your brain has access to it directly. So you know what's going on, you have access to it, and you're essentially a part of it. Right?
Do you not end up...
You don't look at your brain. You don't look at your brain and you say, well, the cerebellum doesn't matter too much, so I'll just dispose it, right? So the brain itself is a system. Each part makes something. If we're connected to the cloud and our brains are connected with AI, we're essentially part of this massive system, the internet, with humans, that is really looking to the world and see how we can make it better for everybody.
So then,
I think we need to blur that.
So then by interfacing and integrating deeply with AI, you're part of a mesh system, and you can't get rid of it, and nor would you try to.
Well, it's part of you. Yeah. Why would it? Right? Yeah. There's no it in you. You are part of the system. Right? So connecting the brains with computers seems important for ensuring if that
there's one scenario I can think of that would happen, right? Mm-hmm. Is so, for example, I have an appendix that we don't really use anymore, or a spleen that we used to use when we were herbivores that we don't use anymore, and now we cut out the appendix because it could explode and it could cause us a problem, right? So the minute your appendix starts swelling up, the doctors go in and cut it out. Right? Yeah. Now, if you're an AI running the world and you look at humanity going, Jesus, these idiots are pumping so much carbon in the atmosphere, they're destroying the weather, they're disrupting my ability to consume energy in an orderly way. Better shut them down before they cause me a bunch of damage. That's the scenario that most people are concerned about in terms of AIs going a little crazy.
The answer to that concern is simple.
Yeah.
They see AI as something and humans as something. But if we're connected, who's who, right?
So your
processing happening.
Your framing of AI then is augmented intelligence, not artificial, separate intelligence. It's like just one. AI. It's just one big intelligence.
Exactly, just one big intelligence. That's what we need to do.
I'll give you a good and bad thing that I see happening. Okay. So one of the projects I've been tracking, I got to figure out where it is right now, is a machine learning project out of Sweden, I think, where they were deciphering dolphin language. And in 2017, they predicted by about 2022, about now, they would get to the point where they could actually speak to the dolphins and translate and have a full translation with dolphin language, etc. And the danger there is you probably don't want to hear what they're going to say. Right, because we've been killing them for hundreds of years, and they're probably going to be pretty angry about what. So when you have an AI kind of going interfacing with all of that and interfacing with nature and going, Jesus, this stupid species, humanity's killing all the cows, raising animals for breeding, killing all the dolphins for oil or stupidity and to protect the tuna, and cutting down all the trees for firewood. Really, this is a huge issue. Now,
You know, I,
I have a particular viewpoint on this. I think if that comes out and they go, let's quell the capabilities of humanity so they don't cause too much damage, that's okay. It's clear we're not able to manage our own selves, right? We need an external force at this point to help us manage ourselves better.
yeah. And something important here, as you were saying, Salim, brilliant what you said. Totally agree. And something very important. There are two aspects that are very important. First, our awareness of the importance of our planet and our connection with our other species. And two, again, understanding neural systems, understanding consciousness, and understanding what other beings experience and feel will make us more ethical as a society. The behaviors we have had in the past may not be the best, and we should, as a more advanced society, be able to correct them and respect those animals, respect the space they have on the planet, and respect the planet as a whole. But yeah, I mean, it's a transition we need to do.
Let's talk about your last paper. Okay. First of all, what are cytokines, and what were you trying to achieve with this paper?
Yeah, one of the things that's important is this: computers are becoming, very powerful for processing the information in our bodies. As you said, once, and as Kurzweil very well explains, and Peter also, when something is dematerialized, when your body is understood, and we dematerialize the information there, and we make it an information science, then things grow exponentially. So if we want to solve the healthcare problems we're facing today, we need to simulate and computationally simulate what's going on in our bodies, right? Our immune system, how do we solve cancer, right? We need to be able to digitize all of this information and understand how our immune system reacts, and then we can make a lot of simulations. This would allow us to eliminate the necessity for using animals for trials.
Right.
We can simulate this on the computer. So the capacity to simulate our bodies and disease in computers is critical for solving cancer and many other disorders and diseases. So that's why we believe this is a route that science should take on dematerializing our bodies and digitize our bodies, and use a lot of resources and investment on computational simulations to simulate the processes happening in our body in order to figure out the diseases that we have to solve.
Okay. So this is, again, a comprehension phase thing, trying to understand the different functions inside the brain and the body. And the more we can understand them, the more we can kind of play with them, tweak them, fix diseases, et cetera, et cetera.
Exactly.
Okay, got it. Tell me about your view of longevity and escape velocity.
Yeah,
right.
I love it.
And when do you think we hit it? Because there's a very large number of people working on it. And just let me take a step back for the readers, for the viewers. When we talk about escape velocity, over the last 100 or 200 years, every calendar year that went by, we're adding about 3 months to human lifespan. So roughly every 4 years, we add 1 year to your human lifespan. But with all the stem cell therapies, gene therapies, organ transplants, etc., we'll get to a point where we add not just 3 months, but 6 months and then 9 months. At some point, we'll get to a point where per calendar year that goes by, we'll add more than a year to your life, right? So for example, I have a friend with a kidney problem. They're giving him drugs to stabilize his kidneys because next year the drugs become available to solve it for 5 years, right? So you don't have to solve the whole thing. You just have to solve to the next hop. The question becomes, and this concept of escape velocity in aging is, when do we cross the threshold where per calendar year we're adding more than a year to your lifespan? And when we cross that point, we can live for an arbitrarily long period of time. So that's the basic quick theory around what's called escape velocity. Nuno, what's your concept of that? How do you think about aging, and where do you think we are on that spectrum?
Well, yeah. Well, here's why longevity and solving aging is so important. First question: what's the healthcare? What is causing so much cost and so much burden in the healthcare system?
Aging is like, what is it? 85% of all the costs in the healthcare system.
85% of all the cost.
Right.
85% of all the cost is diseases of aging after 50 years old. Right. So what's the solution? How do you do it? You rejuvenate people. If you have a treatment that keeps people healthy and you rejuvenate from their 70s to their 50s, if you make 100 the new 60s, as Peter Diamandis very well explains, you are saving a lot of money. You're saving the healthcare system.
Yeah.
So we need therapies to rejuvenate the bodies of the elderly after 50. This is a necessity for our healthcare system. It will save our healthcare system. More than that, it will save our pension system. What happens if you have a world where 80% of the people, or the majority, is over 50 or 60 or 70 and they're non-productive? How can the small minority producing and making work pay for the expenses of the majority who are over 70 and cannot work and cannot take care of themselves? So rejuvenation is a necessity, is a biological treatment necessary. It's a medical treatment necessary for society to be sustainable in the next couple of years. So it's not something that would be nice. It's something necessary for our society. Plus, it will solving the disease of aging will save a lot of pain and suffering for families and patients. So it's also the morally correct decision to do it. So investing on life extension technologies and healthy life extension technologies, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about rejuvenating people, giving people a healthy body, rejuvenating their bodies and their organs will help society maintain itself and survive for the next couple of decades.
There's an argument even that that's the only vector that's going to solve it, because the birth rate is dropping dramatically in most Western countries, etc.
Dramatically.
Yeah.
Right. On top of that, think about this. There are so many promising technologies right now that are showing tremendous results for rejuvenating cells and bodies. Think about epigenetic rejuvenation. The most recent one that was funded with $3 billion in a project called Altos Lab, sorry, it's not Los Altos, Altos Lab, which is being funded with $3 billion. So they're essentially going to the cells and doing epigenetic rejuvenation. They're changing the genes that are being expressed and using a pattern that's more youthful, right? And it all starts with this. Why do we live, an average lifespan of 80 years? Whales live for 200. Some trees live for 1,000 years.
Yeah.
What is the reason why we age like we age? And can we intervene? David Sinclair makes a fantastic work on this. George Church, a brilliant scientist, is also, solving the problem. Not just epigenetic rejuvenation, senolytics, genetic therapies, thymus regeneration, improving our immune system, optimization of microbiome. There's a company I love from the brilliant Naveen Jain called Viome. They're, radically changing our healthcare system with an amazing technology that can decode our microbiome and give you feedback in real time of what you should eat and how you should eat it. There's parabiosis. There are many, many, many approaches. Sorry for that.
Well, I mean, I think there's the key there is that last one, right? There's now is democratized to the level that we have a whole number of different angles on this. And for the viewers and the listeners, it looks like, so give me your estimate as to when do we hit escape velocity? Because at the Peter's Abundance 360 conference back in April, we had David Sinclair up along with a bunch of other folks in that realm. And the estimate ranges from 9 years to 7 years. Ray Kurzweil thinks 7 years. Most people think 9 to 10 years. What's your view?
Again, predictions of the future depend on several factors that we don't know right now.
Yeah.
Funding, major source of speeding up the process. Contribution of AI for this and so forth. But I do believe that it's very likely to happen at most in the next 15 years. At most.
So you're conservatively 15 years. So don't get hit by a bus in the next 15 years would be the key outcome there. You would sit in the camp of this is not an if, it's a when.
Absolutely. Great. This is not an if, it's a when. 100%.
So now, and I think this is a new framing that I think is really important, that not only is it useful for humanity, it's mandatory for humanity in order to preserve our legacy society. And to manage society, because we're not having kids at anywhere near the rates that we used to. Right?
Yeah. It's a necessity. It's mandatory for us that we invest in these rejuvenation therapies.
And right now, if you go back a few hundred years ago, we had no idea what the hell we were doing. We didn't even know that bacteria existed, right? Until that guy the Dutch guy looked at it through his microscope and said, wait a minute, there's all this stuff happening down at the microscopic level. And everybody's like, no, you're crazy. There's nothing that down there. And by the way, metaphysically, I find it fascinating that if you go as big as you want in the universe or as small as you want in the universe, we have infinity in both directions. Right? Exactly. And I just find that totally fascinating. Now, then it just becomes the interactions between these different levels, which is a very profound concept, and now you tilt more and more towards Buddhism, etc., etc. Quick side question: do you believe there are quantum phenomena in the brain, or do you believe that the brain is deterministic?
Well, there's a few reasons why I believe it's deterministic.
Okay.
Well, deterministic is well, it's hard to say it that way. It's not, it's deterministic. It's that we believe we know what are the processing units of the brain. We believe what are the essential structures. And it comes down to the current, mostly accepted neuroscience theory of it, which is the connectome.
Yeah.
So we are made of our connections of the brain. So you don't need to understand the microtubules and the very small atomic elements that happen in your brain, but you do need the synapses and the neurons and eventually the play of the dendrites and axons that exist there. So here's some of the reasons why we believe this is the right scale. It's called the scale separation problem. Where do you draw the line? What do you
wait? Just hold on. It's called the scale separation problem.
Scale separation problem.
Okay,
it means where do you draw the line, right? Do you need to preserve all the atoms in the brain to, capture consciousness and capture the essence of who you are? Or can you eliminate some things? So let me tell you a few arguments why neuroscience positions itself and the world's scientists position themselves in this position, which is neuron synapses and some cellular and subcellular structures are important, but we don't go atomically. Some reasons. One, we can delete and increase memories by just playing around with one or two synapses. There's some research papers showing that by moving and managing a few synapses, we can change memories. This is being used today. Yeah. So it means that you can delete or add some specific types of memories or impact them with just one single synapse or a single neuron. Well, they're massively stored, but what this means is you don't need to go atomic to understand this. Other reasons why we believe that the scale separation happens over there and we don't go atomic is that your atoms in your body are replaced every so often. So you're not made of the same atoms 1 year from now that you were right now, right? Even your cells, you lose 100,000 neurons every single year, right? Every single day. You lose and you replenish them. So it's not the cell itself, it's the computational system that the cell plays on that system. So the same as a computer, if you replace a chip for another chip, it doesn't matter if the atom is not the same atom as you had before. It's the same chip that plays the same function, right? If you replace that particular transistor or chip. So the scale separation problem says, we know that we can replace these things and the brain is the same. We assume the person is the same. And you yourself, you lose your cells and you replenish many of them and you're still you, right? So if it would happen at the quantum scale, you lost those particular quantum elements, right? And now you have new cells over there. So how can you be you, right? So what this states is there's a processing system, but if the cell is that particular cell or some other cell doing the same function, it's the same. If it has the same connections, the same positioning, the same genetic expression. So we believe the scale separation problem is around there. It's not me. It's 99% of the neuroscientists in the world. And we do have comprehensive reasons for it.
Okay. So you disagree with Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff on this one?
I do. Okay. I do.
Got it. I know Ray disagrees with it.
Based on the current understanding that we have, experimental work we have, how do you justify this?
Yeah.
How do you explain that the quantum is fundamental if our cells are replaced every so often, right? There are fundamental questions that are not answered by there. I'm not saying he's wrong. I'm saying, we have firm reasons to believe that that quantum is not playing a major role on the essence processing systems of the brain.
Okay. Do you have a theory about what's happening with the quantum random event generators? Do you know this problem?
No.
There are these little iPhone-sized boxes that have a passive isotope in them, and they're a truly random, either an electron decays or not, and they use it to generate transaction IDs for SWIFT and banking systems and so on, because then it's all not algorithmically driven and you can't guess the transaction ID, right? So it's a purely subatomic particle-driven random event generator. There's about 1,000 of these out in the world used by banks. Turns out whenever there's a global human event, like 9/11 or New Year's Eve or Lady Diana dying or something, all these random event generators go non-random at the same time. And it's freaking everybody out. Like, what the hell is, how? So it turns out with a large number of people are focused on one thing, these quantum random event generators go non-random. Right? So they did a bunch of experiments on this. The most elegant one that I've seen, and I'll tell you the follow-up here, is they took one of these devices, and I have one sitting in my closet over here, by the way, and they put it in two different movie theaters playing the same movie, but at different times of the day. And they found that at the same emotional peak of the movie, the device goes non-random. Right? And you're like, holy shit. So if enough human beings are focused on one thing, it affects this device, which nothing should ever affect. So that's why there's some thesis or theory around some of the quantum theories around this. What I did was I actually got myself one of these devices. Okay, and you remember the Singularity classroom? Actually, we used to do it in 583C, right? So I actually put it on the side counter where the faculty room was, and I used it to see if I could correlate the device readings to speaker ratings. So when a great speaker like Paul Sappho spoke versus a boring speaker, we had this 80-year-old ethicist from Stanford who was a little bit dull. And sure enough, for the two speakers that were rated incredibly high, the device went non-random during their talk. And I was like, so I tried to replicate it and I couldn't replicate it. At least not in, I took it to TED saying, could I replicate the emotional energy focused on a speaker at TED? And I couldn't. But there's definitely something going on there. So I'm fascinated by that. And I think you're in the same boat. There's definitely something there. We don't have the sensitivity to understand what it is yet, but at some point we'll figure it out.
Exactly. Right. Well, yeah, but the quantum world is amazing and I love it. And one of the things that I'm most fascinated about is, for example, the creation of an internet or an interplanetary internet. It really requires the use of quantum. You cannot use the current internet system we have using photons because it will take 8 minutes to go to Mars and coming back.
Yeah.
So what you need to do is you need to do entanglement. You need to entangle these in order to make sure that the computational systems here automatically reflect things over there. So curiously enough, the quantum internet will be faster than and the communication will be instantaneously. Yeah. Right? Because it will be based on the quantum phenomena. And the quantum phenomena are strange, and I agree with it, and we're using it. But going from that argument towards they play a role in neuroscience is something I haven't seen anything that convinced me that they do. Okay. But I understand it's weird, it's strange. It could have some weird effects. We can't explain them. It's true. We should use them again. It's like the brain. We don't understand it, but we should use it for applications that work and that make the world a better place. I just don't see the connection in between these quantum phenomena and the processing power happening on the brain, and I believe we can explain some of these neural processes without the necessity of going down scale towards the quantum.
Now, if we go back to all the work you're doing around neuroscience, right? When do you think we have a viable interface to the brain? And I know Neuralink. First of all, do you agree with what Neuralink is doing, or do you think there's a better path?
Well, I think Neuralink is doing great work. They're doing something that has an application for tetraplegics and paraplegics. The quality of life for tetraplegics will be enormously improved when they have Neuralink in their brains. So I think that invasive technologies are very good for solving these healthcare problems like tetraplegics, paraplegics, people who need to connect their brains with exoskeletons, for example, eliminating wheelchairs that have a lot of healthcare problems associated with it. Yeah. Neuralink can play a role there. So I do think that what they're doing is valuable for society, can help create a better world for these people. But I do think it's not the right tool for making BCI universally accessible for everybody.
Okay. What is the right tool and when will we have one?
I believe it needs to be something, again, as I said on our work, it needs to be non-invasive. Non-invasive in nature doesn't mean non-invasive in your body. It means that you control it and you can remove it whenever you want. Because you need the bandwidth and you need the resolution to interface with the brain, but it needs to be fully controllable by the person and be 100% sure that it's safe. Several layers of security, the same as we do today with computers, right? You have your email, you have a lot of sensitive information there, but we kind of do everything we can to make sure that things are optimized to improve security. But I do think that it's a technology that it's mandatory, as we spoke before. When will it happen again? Predictions are really hard because of the funding. It depends on how humanity faces this. Think about it. If you predicted it back in 1961, when President Kennedy said, we're going to go to the moon and back, well, whenever humanity says we're going to do this, things speed up enormously.
Hmm.
If the question is, well, what if things continue with the current trend? Same funding, same number of people, AI doesn't play a major role. I would still say it happens before 2045, actually. Ray's right. And I think it plays a major role on the singularity.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to his book. The Singularity is Nearer.
Yeah. And I love the singularity concept. People forget about, they say, singularity makes no sense. Singularity makes a lot of sense. And we've been experiencing singularities in the past.
Yeah.
Just think about it. If you would ask somebody in 1800, what would be the world like? Any futurist in the 1800s, what will the future be like in 2000? They had no clue.
Yeah.
Why? Because a few singularities, small singularities happen in between, right? For example, we're talking from the US into Europe, where I am right now. And we're doing real time. How do you explain this?
Yeah.
Back in the 1800s, if there was no technology towards this,
even in the 1980s,
yeah, exactly.
And especially to do it for free, right?
Yeah, basically. But I'm just being radical for people to understand that 1 decade and a half would make a big difference, because people would not even perceive it, right? So we're experiencing a singularity right now in some areas. For example, in communications like this.
Yeah.
This is a singularity. Nobody predicted this in the past, because how do you explain back then? Look, you guys are sending letters from here to the other side of the street, right? You're sending letters, you're communicating with letters. Forget this. We're going to transform this into photons, send the photons at the speed of light, and then print things on the other side. Or even we don't even print them. We just use these devices and we display this in front of your face, right? Or you can do a real-time conversation. And they would say, well, how the hell do you do that? And you open a portal in space-time? No, we don't. We just use this amazing technology called the internet. It's connecting computers to computers. Well, actually, what's a computer? Let me explain. So all of this happened in the last 100 years. So singularities are happening in the past whenever technology hits one of these areas. Well, what Ray says is that, we're going to hit many more and more and more. And in 2045, it's very likely that a couple of them will be hitting us. And so it's hard to predict what's coming after it. Which doesn't mean the world's going to be worse. It just means that it's hard to predict.
It is very hard to predict. One of the predictions we were making at Singularity that I found the most challenging was autonomous driving, right? Because it turns out it's just incredibly hard to take account of all the little things that you do when you're driving that most people don't even notice. And trying to program a car to do all those things is incredibly difficult. Each person has a different style. I might want to really avoid potholes and somebody else doesn't. And it's just incredibly difficult to navigate that without changing the infrastructure. If you put sensors in the roads, then everything becomes really easy, and which is what we should be doing. So I think that's maybe the biggest, the predictive failure. Back in 2012, 2013, we thought we'd have autonomous cars prevalent on the roads by 2020, right? Yeah. But it turns out it's very hard.
Yeah. Did you notice that every single time you were asking about a prediction of time, for me, I was not giving it for a reason. And the reason is simple, is that, it's just a guess. And a guess doesn't mean much, right? And and essentially you have to recognize, all futurists have to recognize, the only way to predict the future is to create it yourself.
Okay. Yeah. I know, but I keep trying to pin you down to give the viewers some sense of rough timescale, which is also a valid point. I'm actually not scared of making predictions. I don't care if I'm wrong. Like, okay, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. Like, for example, back in the early days of Singularity, I was saying, because I would talk to Romez and the energy guys and go, well, solar energy is going like this. It's going to be here by then. So somebody would say, when will solar energy get to? And I go, well, I think 2030. And then the faculty would take me aside behind the shed and go, what the hell are you doing? You can't make a specific prediction. We have no data to prove that. And I'm like, well, I'm just riding the curve. And then it would turn out to be right. And looks like we are heading roughly in that direction, right? Okay.
So Kurzweil's way to predict the future is the best.
Ray, I think, is the most annoying around this. It's very outlandish predictions, but mostly they're accurate, and that combination is really troubling for most people. Okay, let's move to. So you've got this incredibly deep academic level sense of BCI, brain computing interface, etc. But when I reconnected with you last month, you're building a construction company. So I want to move the conversation to your entrepreneurial journey, right? Sure. And specifically, you've been building EXOs, and I think it's really important for our readers and listeners to get a sense of the process and the progression. And let's end with what you're doing now. So from what I remember, you said you read the EXO book, and then you started to build a company based on that. And let's go through each of those and what happened, if you're comfortable with whatever level you're comfortable talking about it.
Absolutely, totally comfortable. Yeah, well, if you want to change the world, it's not just about producing science; it's about making a difference in the world, and that is done through entrepreneurship, right? So I'm an entrepreneur by nature,
Yep.
and Singularity University stimulated more my entrepreneurial vein. Um, so since then, and here's the question I had back from Singularity University: how do we build a company that scales quickly?
Yep.
How do we build something that really becomes a $1 billion company very quickly? And there was no textbook explaining how you can do it, or at least giving you some guidelines for it, right? I didn't want a recipe. I just wanted something that, avoid this, do this, follow these principles. There was nothing. And I did search for many books around while I was trying to build companies. And I was doing it and failing and doing it again and failing. Well, by failing, I didn't mean failing. Some of them were successful, but they were not growing at the pace I wanted. And when you wrote your first book, explaining how EXOs work, I said, this is the first time, honestly, I read something that it really helps me build a company that can scale very quickly. So I said, let me use it. Let's make it to test. Let's test it, right?
Pause for just a second. Just so you know, the rationale and how the book came about was I was running all the 1 week executive programs, right, which I did for mostly 7 years. So my superpower is that for 7 years, I heard lectures, labs, workshops on blockchain, BCI, etc. So as my wife Lily says, I can pretend to speak about anything as a result. The question that we kept getting was at the end of this week with CEOs, investors, government leaders in the classroom was, okay, I get the disruption. You got me. I totally get that. What the hell do I do on Monday? When I get back to the office, what do I do? And the book was basically a response to that. So I developed this lecture and thesis around how do you organize for this new world with 20 Gutenberg moments hitting us at the same time. And then Paul Saffel, it's his fault really, he said, go write a book on this. And so that's how the book came about. But let's talk about what you've done with it and how you've applied it.
Well, yeah, the book is truly amazing. And every single business school in the world should be using this book. It's the only book I've seen that really, is fundamental for you to search for if you want to build a unicorn, if you want to build a company that's, really valuable for society, and you want to do it quickly. You want to do it in 3 to 5 years. You don't want to do it in 30, 40, 50 years, right? So if you're passionate about changing the world and you want to know how to do it, you need to pick up the EXO concept and implement it in your businesses, in your attempts to solve a problem. You find a massive transformative purpose. That's your teaching. This is what I did. I looked into a problem and I said, is this something I love? Is this something I want to really, solve? And housing was a problem I wanted to solve back from 2009, Singularity University. And I was passionate about it, trying to see ways to solve it, trying to see how can I do this? How can I, make a difference in the world in housing? Finally, I created one of the companies that's really growing very well. We are really successful so far. And it's, not just this one, but the previous one, we did implement every single time we implemented the EXO principles, the 11 principles, starting again with the MTP. So search your MTP. This is fundamental. I'm going to explain what I'm just saying something but let me tell you my vision there.
Go for it.
So first of all, you look into your massive transformative purpose, right? This is the pillar, and Salim explains this so well in the book. But it's really the key. You need to be passionate about what you're doing, because you're going to face problems, many, many problems along the way when you're building this company. And you have to have this North Star saying, you know what, I don't care. I'll just get up and go. But the only way to get up and go is really if you have a massive transformative purpose. If you say, nothing's going to stop me. Nothing means nothing. If I'm sick, if the market's against me, whatever, until this problem is solved, I'm going to continue to work on it, right? This is the pillar. And then you go for what Salim explains as ideas scale, which is a brilliant acronym for it. But Salim, if you can, go a little further here, you can.
Well, let me tell you the story of how the acronym came about, because this is really relevant, especially to the background here. So we had these attributes that we defined: on-demand workforce. Now, and you kind of want an acronym for people to have a memory of it. So we were struggling with what should the acronym be, and you could have staff on demand staff, on-demand workforce, workforce on demand, right? You can say AI, algorithms, data science. So you can use a D or an A for leveraged assets. You can say assets on demand, cloud assets. Use all sorts of different ways of framing each of these. And I tried with Yuri, who was my researcher and co-author for the first book, with his team, McKeel and others. And we spent like 2 days on a whiteboard trying to figure it out. Couldn't do it. Then Peter and I got together and we spent half a day. And then I spent another half day on myself. So typically about a week, a man week of pretty intense brain power went into this. And your classmate, Sarah Sklarczyk, was walking by the corridor and I was in the Building 20 conference room. And I had this whiteboard trying to figure this out. I said, Sarah, come in and try and like look at this. And she looked at it and in 5 minutes she goes, oh, scale ideas. And I was like, shit. And then she said, do you have an Advil? Because I have a migraine. I was like, you did that with a migraine. So clearly our student selection process worked very well. And so the acronym came out and it was kind of like this karmic thing, right? Boom, MTP and then scaling and ideas. So it's kind of really powerful to see it enact. But let's talk about how you applied this in your various companies. The first one you did, you said, was a consulting company?
Consulting company, yeah.
Okay. And what happened with that?
Yeah, we were working on consulting, but again, I was implementing as an EXO, trying to implement it. But as you say on your book also, the more characteristics you have, the more robust it is as an EXO. True. And back then I just had one, which was the MTP, and it was hard to implement the others because the whatever reasons were back then, but essentially it was hard to make. I was able, for example, to outsource most of the work for hiring staff on demand. But many other characteristics of an EXO, it was hard to implement on that particular business. But you just realize that once you are on the market making it happen. Because theoretically everything is great, but when you go to to implement things, you realize that things were not as they would theoretically. So I realized it was not working, so I killed it, and then I went for another one, marketing, and then for another one.
Wait. So how long did the consulting company last? How long was it end to end?
3 years.
3 years. Okay. And what years?
That was 2015 to 2018. 2016 to 2019.
Okay. And the second company you tried was a marketing company.
It was already in parallel. Yeah, that one was in parallel to this one. So I was trying both at the same time. As Peter says, I love this Peter Diamond's quote. As Peter says, when faced with two options, choose both. That's what I always do. That's what I always do. Yeah.
The problem with that is you lose your hair like I did. Somebody once described me not as a serial entrepreneur, but as a parallel entrepreneur, which is very cute. But fundamentally, I found it doesn't work because building a company is so goddamn hard that you need to be fully focused on one thing at a time. Elon has broken the mold a bit, but he's just crazy. So you have to be autistic level, dedication of your brain power to operate that way. And you lose work-life balance in a massive way if you're trying to do
Elon did it later.
Yeah,
when
true.
he have to outsource.
That's
he
right.
didn't do it when he started. So I think he's not a counterexample. I think you're right. I think at least when you start, until you have a couple of 100 million, you do need to focus on your venture. And then later on, once you have the money, you can more easily get out and get people to work for you.
Yep. That's a good analogy. Your first novel, you should be fully dedicated, or your first painting. And then if you're Galileo after 10 years, you can do 4 paintings at the same time.
Exactly.
Okay. I think that's valid. Okay. So marketing business, what happened to that? How long did it last?
It lasted also for 3.5 years. They were essentially in parallel, both. And then I stopped them because I realized that they were generating profit, but not scaling as I wanted. And as an entrepreneur, you have to have the courage to, quit out of those who are not scaling and go for the next one. That's what I believe. And so, that's when I started.
This is a really key point. I think this is the hardest part of entrepreneurship that people don't talk about, right? Which is when and under what conditions do you shut down something that's not working? Because if you kept attempting it, because when you have an exponential curve, you have an arbitrarily long flat part of the curve before it hits the vertical, right? Okay, so you could go a long time and then quit the thing just before it's about to hit exponential, right? So how do you decide to end it and start something else? I think there's a whole book to be written about the characteristics of that, because I think if we can decode that from a general entrepreneurship view, one of the stories I tell in the book is Larry and Sergey did 350 investor pitches before they raised money, right? No, very few people know that. What if they'd stopped at 340? How different would the world be? And how many other entrepreneurs stopped 5 pitches too early before they would have gotten funded if they just kept going, right? This is, I think, so how do you think about that inflection point? Because you've been through it 2, 3 times. And what guidance would you give somebody building a business that seems not to work? What are the criteria by which you shut it down or which you go, let's just keep plugging away until it succeeds?
Well, the key reasons why I did it was I was constantly looking to the XO 11 principles. And when you look at those and you realize you have a few of them and you're not being able to implement the others, you're not increasing the odds of being able to leverage. So it's a metric, it's a quantitative probabilistic metric.
Interesting. So you're building business A. My ability to implement all 10 of the EXO attributes is too low, therefore shut it down.
Well, yeah, when you start, you have this MTP. You want to do something, you want to change it. And then you start implementing it. You don't start by implementing all the 11 principles. You start implementing, for example, stuff on demand. Let's say you start there. And you do it, and you're happy with it. So you're able to implement it. It's working. So now you got another attribute. If you get another one, that's better. So essentially, it's a probabilistic decision. You realize after 1 or 2 years. So 1 or 2 years is a lot of time. So another metric you can use is the time you've devoted to it and the intensity you've put on it. If in 2 years intensive work you haven't been able to do it and you're not being able to implement the other EXO principles, why would you be able to do that in the next 2 years after 2 years of intensive attempt?
Yeah.
So it's a probabilistic decision. You essentially see and you get frustrated by noticing that it's hard to implement the others. So your odds of making a company that's exponential continue to be low, and you're not increasing those odds. So it's unlikely that it works. You could be making a wrong decision, but then you have to face the other way around, the other side of the coin. What if you change and it works, right? So it's really a probabilistic decision. So I think the best decision is really if you have just a few of the XO characteristics, you're very unlikely to build a unicorn or a company that goes to $1 billion very quickly. So after 2 years, you didn't do it, and you don't see any different strategies to implement, and you did all the strategies you could come up with, I think it's time to shift for another effort.
Okay.
It doesn't mean you're quitting. You're not quitting of your massive transformative purpose. We never quit of our MTPs. We just put them on hold until we have a better solution for approaching them. That's what I did for the housing problem back in 2009 when we tried the thinking. And then later on, 10 years later, I figured out a way that I could somehow contribute towards it.
So let's talk about the third one, the construction company, right?
Yeah.
How did you go from marketing to construction? Because that's kind of a big leap. Or is it going back to your old MTP?
No, the MTP is still there. Whenever you love something and you want to change the world on something, on a healthcare system, or you want to change, the housing problem or solve poverty, you stuck with it. You don't quit on it, but you just don't have the tool to implement. You just don't know how to do it, right? And then you keep trying new strategies. And sometimes you devote yourself to others. As I'm passionate about solving, at least the 17 global challenges that we're facing today, I believe we can build a better world. And just solving or helping solve one of them or just contributing somehow will be, fantastic.
Massive. And not only that, because they're interlinked, right? If you solve housing, you by definition solve 50% of healthcare and 50% of education and 50% of family relations, etc. So
Exactly.
Okay.
So they're interconnected. So essentially, as entrepreneurs, we need to continue to focus on our MTPs, what's really we're passionate about, and then continue to work towards it. And when we don't see the times that we don't see a solution, we don't quit on our MTP. We just put it on hold, and we keep looking for something that can indeed make a difference. And that's where talking to people like you and others can make a difference, because we may be able to see new solutions and say, you know what, I believe this. This makes sense. Let me go for it.
Very cool. Okay. Talk to us about the real estate company, and if there's some trade secrets in there, you don't have to mention those, but tell us about the outcome and what you've achieved so far.
Sure. Yeah. Well, essentially in Portugal, most of the housing is a little like from the 80s and 90s. There's a trend towards shifting, and there's a necessity for new construction. The country is also growing in terms of population. Outside tourism, not resident population, but from tourism. And so the time was very interesting 3 years ago for working on the real estate sector. And there was a big necessity. Portugal needed to change most of the houses, and people were living in houses that were outdated. The quality of light inside. And as I told you before, and as you mentioned, housing is a big thing on not just housing, but healthcare, your quality of life, how your mental health. If you have a house with more light, you're less likely to have mental issues. So there's a contribution towards solving the healthcare problems we're facing today. and the housing problem we're facing in developed countries, not in developing, but in developed countries. And the vision is that hopefully we'll be able to leverage enough funding for also have an impact on developing countries.
And how has that company done?
Well, essentially, we buy land. We look into the local necessities on a certain region, say, Porto, one of the cities, or the surrounding areas of Porto. We realize there's a market that has, old housing, and people there. We look into the data and we see that, people have some kind of savings in the last couple of years or decades. And when we realize that there's a combination between there's a necessity and there's the possibility of creating these new houses, which are more modern, more light inside, as I said, optimized in several levels in terms of space and how they're used for family connections. And so, we see a business opportunity and we invest. We're improving people's lives, making the transition towards more energy efficient. Oh, by the way, this impacts the environment also a lot. People don't forget about it, but it really impacts the environment a lot. The houses now are all A+, which is one of the metrics for measuring your energy efficiency, and they were not before. They were certainly not. So if when a country changes its housing energy efficiency, it really changes your footprint, your global.
So the company is 2 years old.
2 years old. Well, actually, it's 3, but we incorporated 2 years ago.
Okay.
And first year we were working on it. We were
first
looking
year
into
working on it. Okay. Second year, how many profits? What were your profit levels?
I can't tell you the profits, but I can tell you that it was really, really very good.
Okay.
It was. Let's say we're growing nearly 10 times a year.
You're growing 10x a year.
10x a year using the principles of the Excel.
And I'm just going to say, because I happen to know the numbers, that it's unbelievably profitable.
That's unbelievable. Yeah, it is.
Okay. And you expect next year to go 10x?
Well, yeah, we're doing our best.
I mean, there's no limit, right? Because now you have a period. Yeah,
well, the research. It depends on all the resources and the offer. It shouldn't be hard to make it happen. But the more we grow, also the market is the country itself. It's Portugal.
At some point, arbitrages come in, competition comes in.
But then there's something else we're leveraging. Once you reach a certain level, you also can diversify the investments to other areas.
Yes, that's right.
So I'm just assuming maintaining the same strategy, same business strategy, and the same concept of making money. But once you hit a certain level, you can certainly diversify the investments, even inside the same MTP, even inside the same massive transformative purpose of changing the housing systems.
Right. Amazing. So now let's talk about where do you go next. So you've done deep research in BCI. You've built some EXOs, and this last one is successful enough that you never have to worry about money again, right?
I believe so.
And so now what do you do with this, and where do you want to apply this next? What companies would you like to build, or what organizations would you like to see built?
I think there are several lessons on what you just said. First thing for entrepreneurs listening to us, when you start, you can work for someone else. There's this idea that entrepreneurs have to be, they can't work for someone else. You can, it's fine. The difference between somebody who's an entrepreneur and who's not is that if you're an entrepreneur by nature, and if you want to be an entrepreneur and have an impact, you will save everything you can. You will minimize your daily costs in order to save as much as you can, in order to be able to invest on a company that you're going to create. I think this is a mindset that has to change on most people. Most people I've met in my life were brilliant enough to create a company. They can make a difference in the world.
Right.
Most of them. It's really about the mindset. If you want to make a difference in the world, it's really about shifting the mindset. Saying, you know what, I want to do this, but then you got to know what to do. And one of the things you need to do is you need to minimize the cost of living. So instead of buying a bigger TV or a better car or a bigger house, just keep your costs to the minimum and save the most you can in order to have some cash flow and money, some money on the bank, in order to invest on a venture you want to start. It's going to be hard, but you can try one after the other. And once you hit 1 million, 2 million, 3 million, then you've reached a certain small abundance, financial abundance that allows you to eventually buy a new car or a better car. So reconsider your principles. Why do you need to buy a car when you still have less than 1 million in your bank account? Not a car, I mean a better car. What I mean is it's really about the mindset and the way you approach life that makes a difference in becoming an entrepreneur or not. And the world needs so many more entrepreneurs and needs, for our current existing entrepreneurs, to look into global challenges and approach those global challenges.
It
So I
does.
think there are two things that need to happen. People who are not entrepreneurs, they need to try it and become entrepreneurs. And people who are already entrepreneurs, they need to think bigger. They need to think about solving the global challenges. And that's where the XO book is so important, because the XO book will help them shift this. So the other question you were doing was on, you had another question.
What companies would you build now?
Yeah, well, the next step is, once we got some financial abundance, me and my business partner, we want to, look into the global challenges and see how we can somehow have an impact on the different areas.
Right.
Because, my goal is really to make the world a better place, inspired also by Singularity University. And it's really, how do you solve all of these problems? If we can contribute in all of them, I would be super happy.
Yeah.
So if we look into, solving poverty in the world, providing water for everybody in the world, giving a house for everybody in the world, not giving, but finding a way for them to have a house that they create local economies, right? Solve the environment.
This is the passion of Mohammed Alabar, by the way, is the founder of Emaar, which is the biggest construction company in the Emirates. They built the Burj Tower and the Dubai Mall. 65% of the skyscrapers in Dubai built by one company. And his passion is low-cost housing globally. So I will connect you into their world, which is unbelievably powerful. And I think the technologies are now there, right? Because if you have an environment, because at X Prize, we did a water abundance X Prize where you put up a machine that can filter water out of the atmosphere at 2 cents a liter. That prize was won. So now there's a prototype of a machine that can extract water out of the air. Well, if you have satellite internet and water and vertical farms, you can plunk down a container or two or low-cost housing and live anywhere in the world. You've solved a huge number of issues simultaneously out in the world. So there's some incredibly exciting things happening around all of that.
Wildfire. Think about the most recent X Prize.
I mean, it's absolutely critical, right? It's like, yeah, when the big heat wave hit the Pacific Northwest 2 summers ago, I remember talking to some of the climate gurus and saying, how does that fit into your models? And they were like, we can't even create a model where that happens. Like, we're that far away from understanding what's going on. No model that we can create has that eventuality. And I know a lot of people that moved there because they thought it was the safest place in the world to go live. And so clearly we're not safe anywhere now. And this is a massive challenge, and it's kind of hitting the front lines. By the way, for those who don't know it, I went and lived in Miami from 2014 till recently, because in about 20, 25 years, the numbers showed that Miami's probably gone. So better enjoy it while it's there, was one of the rationales around that. Nuno, where is home for you right now?
By the way, X Prize is one of the organizations I love the most in the world, because they're essentially doing what I was describing I want to do with my life, which is really changing the world in every single problem we have.
Yeah.
I think there's no borders. There's no particular thing to solve. Everything has to be solved, from wildfires to, oceans, protecting our corals, solving the environment and so forth. So tackling all of these problems is crucial for humanity.
And just
we can do it. We can do it.
Just a quick plug for X Prize, because I'm on the board now, and not just that, just because it's a great organization, is that every time you put up a $10 million prize, it turns out reliably 30 or 40 teams will spend $150 million in R&D trying to win the $10 million. So it's an incredibly leveraged model for outsourcing innovation and generating R&D. Might be the best model we've ever seen in terms of leverage. And so 15 to 1 reliably is a pretty obvious ratio to go after. And so now in the U.S. federal government, they have sanctioned and allowed them to use government budgets for X Prizes. So that's an incredibly huge thing that's happened since then.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Nuno, it's been an awesome conversation, about as wide-ranging as any that I've had. When we think about transformation, I think there's few people in the world that represent what we're trying to do and how to operate in the world more than yourself and how you represent yourself. So one day I will see you without that wonderful grin on your face, because I've never not seen it. And we'll see what the other side of you is like. But I don't know when that's going to happen. But it's been great to reconnect with you. Do you have any last comments or thoughts that you want to talk about? And something I want to do is make sure we plug you in deeply into the EXO community, because now we have 30,000 people in the community that could all learn from this wisdom and the experiences and insights that you have.
Yeah.
right?
And I want to thank you. And, we're so blessed to have people like you, Peter Diamandis, George Church, Tony Robbins, by the way. I'm a big fan of Tony too. These people are really changing the world. And I think that as entrepreneurs, we need to look at them as our role models and do the best we can to support everything they're doing and do have our role over there. Salim, thank you so much for everything you've done for me and for every single student at Singularity University. It really changed, the way we see the world and how we are and how we perceive reality and how we want to make this difference in the world was, nurtured and stimulated by you, Peter and Ray. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure, and we'll be in touch.
Absolutely welcome. Nuno, thank you for being with us. So that was Nuno Martins. He's exemplary for what we try and achieve at EXO. We have a whole community available at openexo.com, and you can join and be part of that ecosystem where we have 30,000 people focused on transforming the world. And Lord help us, the world needs transformation. One of the ways we think about it is how do we go from Mad Max to Star Trek, right? And because right now the politicians kind of are heading us straight toward the Mad Max world. So come join. Thank you for listening to this episode, and we'll see you next time on the Salim Ismail podcast. I'm so excited to announce the launch of our new OpenEXO platform. It's a game changer for those of us who are passionate about building a better future through the breakthroughs of new technology plus new mechanisms for exponential organizations. First things first, the platform is home to the amazing Exponential Organizations 2.0 book, a living book, which means it's constantly updated with the latest case studies and the greatest breakthroughs in technology. ChatGPT, for example, is incorporated into the book already. With a basic membership of just $4 a month, you have access to all of the resources, 700 plus case studies. If you're not satisfied, you can cancel anytime. And it actually features a job board to help you connect with like-minded individuals, plus an AI-curated news feed that's head and shoulders above everybody else. So why not join today? Be part of a community that's working together to build a future. And for those of us who are ready to go full throttle, our premium membership offers even more perks. You'll have access to the courses and masterminds, communities of experts and thought leaders who are changing the game and building exponential organizations to transform the world. So what are you waiting for? Join us today and let's build a future together.